Hi, Ray here. In this video, I'm going to tell you why after almost a year with my first Nikon Z6, I sprang for a second Z6 and why I passed over the Nikon Z50. And I hope you'll stick around to the end for some more of this. It goes without saying that after I bought my first Nikon Z6 last spring, that I was very pleased with the results that I was getting from it. And such things as I could even pull focus on the rear touchscreen. That was a new experience to me that I enjoyed very much. But my main reason was I have other cameras such as my old Nikon D800 that I've used to shoot other videos on my channel. But especially I wanted to match the colors, and who doesn't love Nikon color science? It's really superb. So I wanted to match the colors of my first Nikon Z6. And of course, the best way to do that was a second Nikon Z6. So that was the first thing. But then the Nikon Z50 was released, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But first, let's get the elephant in the room out of the picture, so to speak. The single card slot in the Nikon Z cameras. The Nikon Z6 and the Nikon Z7 both have the single card slot, and indeed the Nikon Z50 has a single card slot. But in the Z7 and the Z6 we have an XQD card, and the XQD card is known to be especially robust. And to be quite honest, I've never used a second card slot in my other cameras like the D800 and other cameras that I own that have two card slots. I never used them for backup. I don't shoot weddings, but if I were to be shooting something very important, sure, I might use the second card for backup. But usually I use them for either overflow, or if I'm shooting RAW plus JPEG, I'll have the JPEGs written to a second card, but that's very, very rarely. And so I don't have a great concern about a single card slot. If Nikon makes another iteration, a second, more professional iteration of a Z camera, then sure, I'd be happy to have a second card slot, maybe SD. But again, I've never had a single failure, touch wood. That's not wood. That's not wood either, it's fake. But I don't think that, it's just not an issue for me. And let's face it, if you're serious about a real fail-safe backup, you're not just shooting with one camera, you're shooting with at least two. So again, back to the early days with my first Nikon Z6. I bought the camera originally with, nope, wrong lens, with the 50mm 1.8S, which is what you're looking through, so to speak, right now. A short time after that, I invested in the 14 to 30, a wide-angle zoom, which again I was very impressed with. In fact, it was the best, I think the best zoom lens of that range that I've ever used. And then later on, actually not too long ago, just a couple of months ago, I invested in the 85 1.8S. And this lens, as a good portrait prime, again, I think this is right up there with the 50 1.8 as a prime. It's just absolutely superb. Let's talk about the FTZ adapter. And of course now I have two because I got another one that was in with my second Nikon Z6. So now I have two that I keep on these lenses. And these lenses are my F-mount 70 to 200 2.8, which I use quite a bit, and the 24 to 70 2.8, which probably stays on my camera more than any other single lens. I also own the 2x teleconverter, which amazingly, I was really ready to be disappointed, but I was really impressed with this 2x teleconverter on the FTC adapter, say used with the 70 to 200, it works just as well as it did before without the FTZ adapter. So again, I'm super impressed. And just to mention right now that of course we have a 2.8 24 to 70, and we'll soon have the 70 to 200 2.8 S lens. And I've mentioned before in one of my other videos that I'm not going to jump on that bandwagon, shall we say, right away, because I'm so happy with the way these perform at the moment. Some of the first things that I shot with the Nikon Z6 right after I bought it, although I did carry my D800 with me at the time, was theater, landscape, portrait, but I was so impressed that the D800 now pretty much stays in my bag or even at home. My early experiences with the autofocus and the tracking was positive. I didn't have any huge complaints, although I didn't use the tracking that often. I quite often shot as I'm used to with single point autofocus. But with the release of the firmware 3, that is really now impressive, and I can see myself using the tracking, autofocus, and the eye face recognition autofocus much more in my work. So back to the FTZ adapters for a moment. As I said, they work flawlessly with my f-mount lenses, and I certainly see next to no degradation in terms of focus, and certainly no effect on image quality whatsoever. So that was a big pull for me to dig deeper or invest deeper in the Nikon Z system. And because I'm shooting so much video with the Nikon Z6, in fact, that was one of the main draws to buy the Z6 in the first place, then it makes perfect sense for me, as I already have the existing Nikkor lenses and also Tamron, although I've discovered that this just really doesn't work with the Z6. This, incidentally, is the 17 to 35 Tamron aspherical lens. So, yeah, I don't use it with the Z6. And regarding video, the other thing that I want to just mention in passing is the fact that on the Z cameras we can switch effortlessly between stills and video with just that little switch there on the back, which I noticed some manufacturers have copied, not the least the new Fujifilm X-T4. Just a note from me on ProRes RAW, which, if you don't know what ProRes RAW is, it's a video recording codec which gives you increased dynamic range, all that kind of good stuff, which you can record to an external recorder. When that was announced just a couple of months ago and was enabled in camera with a firmware update, but you have to send your camera in for a factory modification, would cost me about $250 Canadian. And I almost went for it when it was first announced, but again, I decided instead to go for a second Z6. So I'm not sure at what point I will get that modification and try out ProRes RAW. Suffice to say that this is being recorded in camera, 8-bit, and you can judge for yourself how that looks to you. I'm very satisfied, certainly for things like YouTube. Which brings us to the Z50. Now, the first thing that attracted me to the Z50 at first glance was, of course, the size and weight savings, even over the Z6, which, of course, is a heck of a lot more compact and light than the D800, which, if I'm carrying this around with the f-mount lenses and so on for the day, man, that's a real pain in the back. So yeah, I was really attracted to the Z50. And the other thing about it was, with the two lenses that were released with the Z50, that came to $1,700 Canadian. So again, relatively affordable. And I thought that could be a real good backup for the Z6 and for B-roll and so on and so forth. However, that's still $1,600–1,700. And as I looked more closely, the first thing that hit me was it's a different battery. Of course, smaller battery probably needed for the smaller body size. And then the second thing was, wait for it, single card slot. But, whoa, my set's falling apart. So yes, single card slot, but for a single SD card. Now, again, as I've said, I've never had a failure of any kind of card, but yeah, single card slot, SD, and just UHS 1. Now the DX CMOS sensor, that's not a huge, that wasn't really a huge deal breaker. I mean, after all, I do own a Fujifilm X Pro 2 with a CMOS sensor, and it makes nice photos. But I had my existing Z6. It has the full frame sensor, and as I said, my main reason was for a backup camera and for a second view, making video. I wanted to make sure that everything matched as precisely as possible. Nikon has said that they see the future in mirrorless cameras, and that's where they're going to dedicate a lot of their research and development. And who knows, we may see something else in the Z cameras before 2020 is out. But certainly I'm fully in. As you can see, I've got myself 3 of the Z mount lenses and obviously 2 Z cameras. So in a nutshell, that's my rationalization for buying the second Z6 camera. And so it's walkies time again, but this time, rather than using my usual GoPro Hero 8, we're going to test out the Nikon Z6 as a vlogging camera. Now, I can tell you right off the bat, it's a heck of a lot heavier because I've got it set up here with the 14-30 f.4 Z mount lens, and on top of it I've got a Rode Stereo Video Mic Pro for the sound, and you'll probably hear the creak in the background there. So here's where the Z50 might have been quite attractive for the weight saving in particular, but also, you know, the Z50 comes with a flippy down screen, which is great because I can't tell exactly what is in the monitor right now, whether I'm guessing I'm a little bit over this side. But the Z50 has the flip down screen. However, seeing as I have this camera mounted right now on my Gitzo monopod, that wouldn't work for the Z50 because the monopod would obscure the screen. I've done this before, but I'm interested once again on this up and down trail to see how the Nikon Z6's stabilization works. We're going downhill now, fairly steep on this trail, and it's starting to rain. Which brings us to that point in the video where I ask you, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do so. And if you found this video interesting or entertaining or useful in any way, please give it a thumbs up. Until the next time, ciao. Okay, but maybe not just quite yet. Maybe we're not going to leave just right yet because, unbeknownst to me, I've never been on this trail before. We get to see this beautiful waterfall. Okay, you can go now. The day is done, and how beautifully.